listening to This Won't Fix You. I'm your host, Nadine Pittam, and this show is a curation of interesting models, metaphors and images discovered or manifested through my work as an accredited psychotherapist. You can expect to hear nifty ideas, clever language and thought-provoking ways of looking at life. Each episode, you'll get one of two alternating perspectives. First, a conversation which introduces and discusses the theory or idea, and we call this the A side, and then the B side, which, while not therapy, is a deeper exploration of that theory or idea from a more therapeutic standpoint. Hello everybody, today I'm joined again by Meg Harper. Hi Meg.
Hello, it's lovely to be back.
Meg was with us before on a previous episode about anxiety, which was one of my favourite ones. It was quite an early one, wasn't it? I think maybe episode 7-ish, something like that.
Wow.
I should have checked that before we started. We're looking at a quote today from a book by Marisa G Franco, and the book is called Platonic: How Understanding Your Attachment Style Can Help You Make and Keep Friends. I love this quote. I'm really glad you picked it, Meg. It's been on my list for a long time, and let me read the quote. I might even have to read it twice because it's quite a convoluted one. Okay, so it's about relationships, essentially. So let's get our minds in that zone. Our behaviours in relationships often lie on a continuum, she says, from those that protect us on one side and those that protect the relationship on the other. To protect ourselves from rejection or harm, we withdraw or devalue the relationship, say it wasn't so great anyway, or act competitive or dominant. But in doing so, we injure the relationship. To protect the relationship, we accommodate the other person's needs, do things for them or affirm them, but in doing so, we are left more vulnerable to exploitation or rejection. When we're in self-protection mode, we are in anti-relationship mode. And when we're in relationship mode, we're defenceless. Insecure people hover in self-protection mode, which is why they struggle in relationships. When triggered, they're thinking about themselves and not the other person. Do you know what? I'm not going to read that twice because folks can always just skip back. Meg, no, we haven't actually had a conversation about this, so I am fascinated to hear what you think. Give me your headlines.
Oh my gosh, headlines. I think I'm just going to go personal, okay, and say that the reason this one really attracted me was because I can see it, or I have been able to see it playing out in myself. So I'm divorced and I'm in a new relationship. Well, when I say new, goodness, I've been in it nearly 10 years now. But, to me, it's still my new relationship because the other one was 27 years, so it's like, it's still new kid on the block. Yeah, absolutely. But I really noticed at first, because obviously I was in quite a vulnerable position, having had a really very difficult divorce and being, well, I'm not sure I ever want a relationship ever again. I'm going to be okay on my own. So in the early months, years, I would say, of the new relationship, I was doing this backwards, forwards thing, because I suppose I was hugely insecure in myself as well as in the relationship. So I'd be like, yes, this is wonderful. I'm really enjoying this. This is like something I've never experienced before. Happy days. And then I'd be like, no, total overwhelm. No, this is not the guy for me. I never wanted a relationship anyway. And I'd completely back off. And I was like, we need to end this. See? And so I would literally back out of the relationship and go, that's it. And I would write emails to him explaining why this could possibly not go on, which was, looking back, I think hugely hurtful. But he was pretty determined. And so it wasn't that he pursued me, but I would, after a while, I'd be, oh gosh, I can't cope on my own. I'm not managing this. He was quite a good thing, actually. Maybe I should get in touch with him and try again. And honestly, we went through this cycle so many times. I can't remember how many times, until in the end it settled. And I still have those moments. But they're nothing like this terrible backwards, forwards thing that was going on, where, when you think of her quotation, I mean, I will come on to this later, that I actually think all relationships are inherently unstable, dynamic, insecure, in movement. So that's kind of part of the norm. But this incredibly distressing backwards forwards thing was about me being, just as a person, hugely insecure. My attachment.
Fears in there.
Yes. And if you think of my own attachment style, I'm very much on the avoidant end of the spectrum. So for me, protection for me, to make myself feel okay, is avoid. It's go back into myself.
Retreat.
Until I can't retreat. Whereas other people, they might have been piling it onto the relationship, and overdoing things and making the guy feel suffocated because that's what did it for them. Whereas for me, it was just no, to be safe, I have to retreat. So
this is going to be an interesting conversation, because I'm an anxious attacher. That I'm on the anxious attachment side of the scale. So we're going to have both perspectives. So the three attachment styles, the three insecure attachment styles are avoidant, anxious, and disorganized seems to be what people are settling on for the title.
Sometimes.
There is, of course, secure, but I think only one person in the world has a secure attachment style. I don't think there are many people who fit that category, but I certainly definitely fall more on the anxious. And so for me, the relationship, I would absolutely sacrifice myself every single time in order to make sure that the relationship was secure. So I would put my needs on one side and then lose myself, and then find myself utterly lost and blame the other person somehow then for not giving me enough attention, or not looking out for me as much. Whereas I hadn't given them any space to do that. I'd just been, like you said, suffocating, sucking up all the air in the relationship.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And so my relationships, like in my adult life, my two big relationships, the one with my husband and the one with my partner, it's interesting because we're all avoidant, essentially. My current partner, well, the way we live is we live in two separate houses because this works for us. So we have plenty of space, and we've considered the whole thing of moving in together, and it wouldn't work for us financially or practically, but emotionally it wouldn't work because we're both introverts and we're both avoidant attachment style. So the whole romantic idea of living together and being everything to one another and all that stuff, that's just not us at all. And you just have to go, well, this is the reality. The dreams and the fantasies, they stay in the storybooks. The reality is we're two avoidants, we're two introverts, and what works for us is lots of time together, but plenty of space apart. And if I think about my husband, he's super avoidant for all sorts of reasons. So it got to the point where when I was seeing a therapist, she said, you're surviving on crumbs through the bars, because there was so little going on between us that it wasn't sustainable for me, because I'm less avoidant than he is. That's not his fault. That's just the way things are. So being realistic, I think that relationship needed to end for all sorts of other reasons, but that was a big part of it.
You've touched on something there, I think, that came out for me when I was thinking about the quote before we started talking, which is that we are responsible. So if that is your ex-husband's, that's the degree to which he wants to be involved in relationship. That's if he's totally happy there, then you then have a responsibility. That's what you're saying. You have a responsibility to respond to that in a way that is true to you. And you were saying that line from your therapist, you're surviving on crumbs through the bars. Oof, it's quite a visceral quote, that, isn't it? And that then is an invitation to you to go, okay, so I need to take responsibility for this. Yeah. And that's not enough.
Because I need more than crumbs. Long term, it's not sustainable. No, it was a big moment that when she said that. One of those lines you'll never forget.
It's a good punch.
But then thinking about what you said earlier, about how, you know, you'll give everything to the relationship. The message for me that comes immediately from that is, oh, you're so selfish. I'm so selfish because I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared to give everything to the relationship. You look at the person who's got the anxious attachment style, who is giving everything to the relationship, and you go, but that's what I should be doing. Because if I'm not, I'm being selfish. There's that kind of trying to get a balance which feels ethical, if you like, between, you know, how much do you give to the relationship and how much do you look after yourself. Yeah, definitely the message for me is, well, if you're not prepared to give everything to the relationship, then you're selfish. Wow. Yeah. So, which is clearly a load of bollocks, frankly. But but you know,
I'd be inclined to
these
agree with you, Meg. What you just said is entirely bollocks.
Yeah.
Because it's not a happy place to be. The utter devotion to the relationship does not lead to happiness. No, anxiety and crisis can come from that. Because if the relationship is, and it's not just the relationship, I think certainly I do feel like I'm on top of it. Sounds like you are on top of the kind of crisis management of your avoidant attachment, in the same way I'm on top of my anxious attachment. But in moments of crisis throughout my life, definitely it has been, if I've had an argument with a friend, or not even an argument, if I just sensed a sort of, that text message was quite short. Have I done something to upset them? And then I'd go off in this huge, pointless spiral about that relationship. Every other relationship then, because all the other ones would be secure at that point, that then is the one thing that I'm focused on, and my entire life then is devoted to fixing that, bridging that, and that's an exhausting way to live, because being anxiously attached, I've always had a lot of friends. I like having a lot of people in my life, and so if I've got a lot of friends, then inevitably, law of probability says one of them's going to be up shit creek at any one time. So I'm spending my entire life like with putty and cement, trying to frantically mend relationships.
Yes, endless. Painting the fourth bridge, my goodness. Yes, leaking the dam here, leaking the dam there. Oh God, awful. Yes, actually, I do have a client. Clients. I've had a client very much like that. The whole thing of, well, I'm worried all the time that somebody doesn't like me. You know, constantly fixing. It is exhausting. Yeah. So I don't have that cross to bear anyway. I have different issues going on. So I'm just sort of thinking what else I thought about when I was preparing for this. And I was thinking about, you know, I think we can think that a healthy relationship is going to be stable. You know, it's just going to feel good all the time. But I was thinking of the metaphor of a relationship, and I looked up, you know, what's the origin of the word relationship? So the ship bit goes back to Middle English, and it means the sort of state of something. So, like, you know, you have your relations, they're the concrete thing, and then you've got this abstract idea of the relationship. And so the same applies to friendship or partnership, you know, the concrete and then the abstract. I was saying, oh, well, that's very interesting in itself, but also a bit disappointing because I wanted it to be something to do with ships, to do with boats, you know, but, you know, the idea of a relationship.
The vessel.
Because I was thinking, the vessel, yes. Because I was thinking, when you think of ships, they're going to be up and down, aren't they? Because they're on the water, so up and down, and they're always the point of a ship is it moves. You know, if you're stuck in the port, you're not really doing your sort of ship job, are you? And then I was sort of branching out from that and going, so, you know, if we can accept that all relationships are in a state of movement, which might be forwards and we're making progress, or it might be times where we're going backwards, and we have to scuttle back into the port to be safe and fix some holes in the sides or whatever. And I was getting quite carried away with this, really, because I was thinking, like, if your ship is sinking, you need to do something fast. You know, don't just watch it sink. Or then I was thinking about what is my relationship? What sort of boat is it like? Is it like well, your boat sounds like it could be a sort of a cruise liner, because you need lots of people on board yours for your relationship boat to be okay, whereas mine might be just like me and my partner, we're just going along side by side in two canoes. Do you see what I'm going? I could go on and on. Well, I was just thinking, like, all the metaphors that we actually already have, like, the relationship is on the rocks, that's very shippy, isn't it? Or there was another one I was thinking of. Oh, we pass like ships in the night. That's how my ex-husband and I had got to. We were passing like ships in the night, totally avoidant. So I was just thinking, when you're perhaps working with couples, it could be perhaps quite a useful idea to bring in, like, well, what is your relationship like? What can we learn from that?
And how much time we do dedicate to, because like I love what you're saying about it being a dynamic, that constant shift. This is something that we can't pin down. It's not something that any of us can rest in. The only and that's what's exciting about it, of course, isn't it? Is that it's a challenge because it's ever changing. And I guess Burrell talks about that there's a constant tension between the freedom of being single, the freedom and all the risk that comes with that, versus the security and the sort of what's the opposite of freedom, I suppose. God, am I going to say entrapment? No, that's terrifying. But there is something that a relationship closes down if we're in monogamous relationships, but even in polyamorous relationships, because we reach saturation point. We can't just keep going because there's only so many hours in a week. And so it is a constant tension between that freedom and that security that we're pulling back and forth. And of course, it's not just us, is it? We have the person at the other who's also at the helm of our ship. And their needs need to be taken into account, and different stresses, and then maybe some of us have children as well. Oh, blimey. Yeah. Yes. And so that negotiation, no wonder everybody comes to therapy, because their relationships are the thing that's causing pain, because they're what we need, and at the same time, they're what causes us the most distress.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So what did you just say then? Oh my goodness, there were so many ideas that I was responding to in what you said, and I can't remember which one to chase.
Was it the Esther Perel stuff, the tension between freedom and?
It was the choices. It's because Alan de Botton, we've probably said this before last time, but he says you need to consider what sort of suffering you prefer, because you're endlessly making choices in a relationship, and you can't, the choice, when you choose something, you always lose something. You can't have everything. So and there's so many clients, they come and they want a solution which will be wonderful, and then you're looking at the options and you go, well, there's no good options here, because this is such a difficult situation. But what is the best of the bunch, really? And sometimes it's better to look at, well, which sort of suffering do you prefer, rather than which joy do you prefer? Because actually, it's the suffering which will grind you down. So
make you better lie in it.
Well, make sure the bed that you're going to lie in is reasonably comfortable. Even if it's not, I can't think of an analogy, but it's not the best of all possible beds. You're maybe not going to get that, but you can get a bed that is reasonably healthy and is going to give you reasonable sleep, so that this relationship feels peaceful enough. It's like back to like the good enough concept that we use so much in counselling, isn't it? That it might not be perfect, but it will be good enough.
And it's our search for the perfect, or our expectation of the perfect, that is causing us the suffering. Certainly the Buddhists believe, at least my understanding of some of the Buddhist theology, is that it's that our suffering comes from the rejection of what is. We're fighting what is. So should is an argument with reality, is something Tara Brach talks a lot about. The reality is this thing. If we're saying it should be different, then, well, we're just causing ourselves an awful lot of pain there, because this is what life is.
This is what it is. And that idea takes me back to M. Scott Peck, The Road Less Travelled, which, you know, when I started training, it was very much a book that is around and people read. Now, I think M. Scott Peck did some bad things later on and has been a bit, you know, well, we don't talk about him. But the first line of that book is life is difficult. And basically, he spends the first chapter telling you to get over it, you know, that if you once accept that life is difficult, you will be able to be more happy. But if you're constantly going, no, this isn't how it should be, then you're going to struggle. Yeah. Yes.
Well, there's all sorts of references pinging in my mind there as well.
Yeah.
Because I know that Byron Katie, I don't know whether you know Byron Katie, she's quite, God, so many things in my head about Byron Katie. She's written a book called The Work, and I think pretty much she just says one thing. And she says it through about 7 books. She's got a YouTube channel. She says the same thing over and over again. And it is exactly this, that it's quite confronting. I don't know whether you've ever seen or read any of it. I bought her book and I bought it maybe it was probably just after you and I met down on that psychosexual course. I bought the book and I read the first chapter and went, well, that's horrendous. I'm never reading that again, almost threw it across the room. And of course, we know what that kind of reaction signifies, don't we? That there is something really important that we need to learn in that book. So I then went back to it about a year later, and I wouldn't say it changed my life. Maybe it had a really profound impact on me, because it is just a relentless articulation of the world is the world, and you cannot change it. You can't change people. You can't change the world. You can't make anybody any different. And that's the bit I was rejecting, I think. Like, why can't I? So that's why I wanted to throw the book across the room, because no, that's a powerless place to be. Surely I have more influence than that. But yeah, when I read it, it's actually been one of the most soothing things I've ever read, even though it's quite confrontational. It's quite a confrontational book.
It sounds like she's very much on the same page as M. Scott Peck. Yeah. I think Miranda Hart refers to that in her book that's come out recently, which I think is a lovely life-enhancing book. I think some people have acted against it because they think, oh, it's not a memoir, it's more of a self-help book. But, you know, it is about her journey through her difficulties of having Lyme disease and the huge impact on that. But she references the work in it, so I shall dig that out and have a look at what she says about it, and then maybe get this book as well. I like a good confrontation, you know.
I'd be interested to know if you throw it across the room. Gosh, I had such a strong reaction. I loved it. Yeah, I love that. Can I go back a little bit to something that you said about when you were talking about the metaphor of the ship and the different ways that we maintain a ship? Because I read something at the weekend. It was my supervisor, actually. Thank you, Morag, who put me on to a woman who writes a column for The Guardian called Eleanor Gordon Smith. And I'd not read the column in The Guardian before, but she does. It's kind of an agony aunt style column.
Okay, yeah.
And somebody wrote in about having an obsession with somebody outside their relationship.
Right.
She talked about. In fact, she talks about if your relationship is shit, if you feel that your relationship is shit, or it's not working, or it's not delivering in the same way that you think it should be delivering, then is it not delivering because you've got your eyes on this shiny thing outside the relationship? We're assuming obviously monogamy here, or that this person sits outside the poly rules.
Yes.
If she said something beautiful little metaphor. Is the bike not reaching its potential because you've stopped pedaling?
Yes.
Or is the bike not reaching its potential because there is something wrong with the bike that needs attention? Do you know what role is the bike is a thing, and the relationship, like you say, is an abstract thing. It needs feeding. Love is a verb. Love is not a thing that lands in us. We become sort of blessed with love, and then for all eternity we find that easy. No. Love is a verb, and it's what we do, and it's how we pedal, so to speak.
Yes. We're talking about the boat metaphor. It could be rowing, couldn't it? Have you stopped rowing, or has your boat got an absolutely catastrophic hole in, and the whole thing is just going to scuttle? You know.
And if it's your boat that's got a hole in, that's not your partner's fault.
No.
We have to fix our own boat, and we started by talking about that responsibility that we have for our own shit, responsibility for the holes in our own boats. We're responsible.
Yes.
We might
Yes.
garner help from other canoes around us, but if the hole is in ours,
Yes.
then that's for us to fix, and
Yes.
that's a painful truth too, I think.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Just going right. So we're thinking of the boats around us. I just want to dive down another
Mm.
avenue here, because I don't know if you've come across the recent book, The Anxiety Generation. I mean, actually, it's been out for a while, but it's just come out in paperback. And Jonathan, I don't know how you pronounce it, Haidt, something like that, Haidt. Anyway, his basic concept is about the huge increase in anxiety since about 2012 correlates to the introduction of the smartphone in young people, but also the overprotection of parents. And what I'm finding interesting is that people are jumping onto the phone thing because it's kind of easy. We can, in schools, we can go, oh, well, we're all going to put the phones in these secure pouches before you come in, or they all have to stay at home or whatever. So that's kind of like, that's something we can do. We can go, oh, I'll stick a plaster on it like this. But what's not being addressed, because it's so much bigger and more difficult to implement, is the overprotectionism of children. And so, children are being brought up, being taught that everybody is a threat, stranger danger, they're all pedos, you've got to just, you can't go to school on your own because something terrible might happen to you. So because we're relational, I think it's utterly toxic that our young people are being taught that, because they can't access the other boats, if you like. The boats around them are seen as a threat. So, how can you not be anxious if your whole we work as a society, we are relational, we need communion with others, and you go, well, you can't because they're dangerous. Then I fear for the future. I really do. It's not going to get any better.
And can I add to that as well? It's not just that the world is a fearful place, but also you do not have the capacity, because that's what the message is, isn't it? If the people who are in charge of the children, the parents predominantly, then if they are overprotecting and they're saying it's not safe out there, then they're also kind of not imbibing the children with the skills that they need in order to
yes,
manage their
yes,
own safety.
yes,
So
yes.
it's like, yeah, let's not necessarily, let me absolutely preface all of this with the fact with the statement that I don't have children. But if we shut down areas of the internet, if we shut down areas of society and socializing, we keep our kids in a sort of sanctified, sanitized world, then what we're not doing is imbibing with them with the skills of discernment, so that when they do encounter things, either in the real world or online, that they have the capacity then to manage that.
Yes, they completely lose resilience, they completely lose empowerment. They're just helpless, really, helpless and anxious. So, how does that fit in with attachment theory? Does it? Just busking here, I'm thinking about this. I mean, you could become incredibly avoidant, couldn't you? Like these young men in Japan. Apparently, this phenomenon is spreading. That men who are just staying in their rooms all the time, doing their computer games, having relationships with avatars rather than with real people. So you just become utterly avoidant. That's one way it can go. Could it go the other way as well? Well, actually, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the whole business about, because particularly young women feeling that their relationships have to be sort of like you were describing, all their relationships have to be fantastic. And then if somebody undermines something, their world crumples. I'm not saying this very clearly, but their own image has to be perfect in order for them to be able to be relational. And if it's not, they go into this complete headspin of, I'm so ugly, eating disorders, self-harm, the whole thing. Because they can't actually have a secure relationship. The whole thing is horribly insecure when it's all these online relationships or phone-based relationships.
Because it's
as
built
I
on
say,
an external validation, because it's that
validation.
external locus of
Yes.
evaluation, external validation. It's coming from outside the self. And I heard
Yes.
somebody say on a podcast, I think it might have been Esther Perel, talked about how we're not negotiating on the streets anymore. When we're kids, we used to play out. Kids used to play out
Yeah.
on the street, and there
Yeah.
was negotiation. And if one
Yes.
kid hurt another kid, then those kind of societies were played out in micro on the streets with
Yes.
skateboards and bikes in a way that it seems a little bit more siloed online, and that
Yes.
I've had lots of conversations as well about the kind of over labeling that people have of themselves, that
Oh,
especially in
yes.
terms of gender and sexuality, that the kind
Yes.
of it becomes a place to feel safe. If I can find the right niche, if I can find the way to
Yes.
label myself, then I can fit in. And actually, the most powerful thing is to allow yourself to fit in anyway,
Mm.
regardless
Mm.
of where you sit on gender spectrum, regardless of where you
Mm.
sit on sexuality spectra. Can I find a way of fitting in as I am?
Yeah. And then, of course, if you decide you're in this place or with this label that is, this is where I fit, that's very lacking in dynamism, isn't it? It's kind of, now I'm fixed. And so thinking about what we're talking about, relationships needing to be dynamic, moving, there's something that feels like a block there towards relationship. I don't know.
I think I agree with you. If we think we can only relate to people who share our demographic identification, I think
Yes.
if we can say, okay, this is where I am, where are you? Talk to me. Let's have a
Yes.
conversation
Yes.
about that.
Exactly. Yes.
But otherwise, if we're saying this is who I am and I'm looking for other people who are like me, because
Yeah.
that then feels safer, then what we're
Yes.
doing is
Yes.
we're narrowing down our
Yes.
capacity to and our enjoyment of relational dynamics,
Yes.
and the
Yes.
difference that
Exactly.
people bring to one another.
Yes. But you said you'd got a sort of angle on this. I don't know if we've talked about your angle on
My
the
angle.
original. Yes.
Well, I suppose it came directly from the quote where she talks about this kind of defense that kicks in with people when they
Mm.
reject a relationship in order to protect themselves, and they will say things like, "Oh well, fuck them. I'm better than this. I didn't really want it anyway." And that seemed like a massive rabbit hole to me that I was fascinated by, because certainly my hours and hours and hours sitting with people in the therapy room says that when we pretend that we do feel something, or when we pretend to ourselves that we don't feel something, we are absolutely setting ourselves up for a life of anxiety, because we're
Mm.
ignoring something. And I think there seemed to be something of that in the kind of, oh well, I didn't want it anyway. Well, if you
Yes.
didn't want it anyway, there's something you're missing. So either you missed it
Yes.
before because you didn't
Yes.
get yourself out of the thing that you didn't want anyway early
Mm-hmm.
enough, or
Mm.
you're out of it now and you're pretending to yourself that you didn't want it
Mm.
anyway.
Mm.
Either way, there's a pretending going on, because there's no nuance in, well, I didn't like it anyway. Let's
Yes.
allow both. And I think that for me, one of the most powerful things that comes out of therapy for people is the capacity to sit with both, or multiple
Yes.
different truths
Yes.
all at once. There isn't one thing that's right,
Mm.
that these
Mm.
things can both be true. Do you know what? It probably wasn't the right relationship for me. I suppose there's a part of me that's glad it's over, but Jesus, I missed that about the person. And
Mm. Mm.
that was a really, we had a beautiful
Mm.
time in that way. And I think being able
Mm.
to open to that, there's
Yes.
pain in there, there's joy in there, but
Mm.
either way, there is extremity of emotion, isn't there? Whether it's a joy
Yes.
or a pain. And I think that
Yes.
subtlety
Yes.
is vital. I suppose
Mm.
that was part of my angle.
Mm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. No, I think we are such creatures of wanting to be, it's right or it's wrong. It's this or it's that. It's good. And I mean, I've been reading the Tao quite a lot recently, and it's so very much, neither of it. You don't have to label. You don't need to label what, um, yeah. I mean, mostly that seems to be what it's about. You don't have to label. You don't have to decide that this is right or this is wrong. There's a both and message to it. I'm probably hideously misconstruing here, but that's what it's giving
this
to
ancient
me.
text.
Yes,
That's what matters, isn't it?
text.
That's what this is about.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your opinion.
Yes, yes.
And there is a false security, isn't there, in naming it? If I can name it, then I have power over it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking, how does this play out in the therapy room? I suppose because I'm very CBT trained in my background, you do come across these like definites that people have, these core beliefs, these negative automatic thoughts that come up and are completely dogmatic. So, they are rules that people are living by. And so often it's a real revelation to go, well, not everybody, not everybody thinks that, actually. I don't happen to think that. It's interesting. I was working with a client the other day, which was about relationships, very much about relationships, because it's about the need to have a child, but specifically to have a daughter, and what there was about having a daughter that was so big. But when you looked at what had gone on, I don't want to sort of identify it, but when you looked at what was going on in her family background, you could see why for her she had all sorts of messages about having a boy would be a bad thing. And so, in that case, it's always like, well, I've got to have the binary opposite. I can't think about having a boy who might be different from all these boys and men that are in my background. That's not a possibility. So it will just have to be a girl, and then we'll have fixed it. But of course, that's so lacking in nuance, so binary, absolutely in a stuck place, because you can't go ahead and get pregnant assuming it's going to be a girl. So you're
of course,
stuck.
And there's the anxiety. Absolutely fertile soil there for the anxiety, isn't it? Because if you want the child, but you can only have a certain outcome for that child, then I think you touched on something there, isn't it? And it's quite starkly put when we think about the other being a child. But when we pin things down, when we try and fix something that is dynamic, something that's alive and moving and vibrating all the time, when we're trying to pin something like that down, what we're doing is we're not allowing then space for the other. And that never more is that more true than in that little story that you just told there, where it's a baby, where it's a kind of fresh life, where it's easy to see then, isn't it, that there is no blame or fault on the baby being born, male or female, or assigned male or female at birth. Absolutely. But we can kind of, I don't know, it feels a little bit more like we might be able to garner a sort of, that person did that to me, so you see they're wrong, and we can gather a lot of people on our side to somehow bolster and justify our rigid positioning. But actually, Elizabeth Gilbert calls that monkey mind. If we're going out into the world and we're asking all the monkeys in the tree what they think, then essentially what we're doing is we're just finding out what monkeys think. What we're not doing is finding out what we think. And so, it feels to me like there's no capacity for the other in that rigid pinning down of a dynamic. And so the more flexibility and nuance we allow in a relationship, and like you say, for that, to go back to the original quote, that continuum of protecting ourselves at one end, protecting the relationship at the other, if we see that as something that slips and slides and moves, if we see all the ways that we relate to one another as things that are in flux permanently, then we do have the capacity to respond more intelligently and more impulsively.
Yes. So going back to the original quote, another thing that struck me was where I get into difficulties is in relations with my own children, which I think the temptation is always to protect the relationship. I mean, I'm not one of these mothers who would be sacrificing anything for my children, which is kind of like a trope, isn't it? That, a mother she will just drop everything and do whatever for her children, and she's going to turn into this kind of tiger who probably might turn into the tiger if somebody was threatening my children. But anyway, but that temptation to kind of like, okay, well, with my children, I do far more pussyfooting around, if you like, not saying the things that with a friend I would say, because I suppose in a way with friends, if you completely mess up the relationship, you can find another friend, but you can't find another replacement child. So you're always in this like, oh, well, I better not say that because and I've talked to my friends about this who have children, that they're the same. It's like, yep, I keep my mouth shut, because I don't want to screw things up, because you still want to be the person that they can bring anything to, or you still want to make sure you have a relationship. And obviously sometimes relationships between parents and children do break down, but it's one of the saddest things. One of the saddest things, and one that comes up in therapy a lot, that I have this really difficult relationship with my mother or my father, and I don't know how to manage that. So yes, it was just really interesting to reflect that with my partner I was quite happy to go, right, I'm here, I'm not here, I'm here, I'm not here. But with my children, like, no, I'm here, I am here, there's no I am not here.
I wonder if it works the other way too, that as children, that we, I'm going to keep my mouth shut because I love my mom, I love my dad, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut in order to, not rock the boat because I love them and I want that relationship. I think I'd like to go back as well to something you said about it's one of the saddest things. I presume you must have had people in your room for whom the breakdown between their relationship with either their children or their parent, predominantly I should think it's a child's relationship with their parent, child. There'll be adult children, but that it's not always. I don't always find it to be a sad thing. There are some times where people have been in my room, and indeed friends, and they've broken down their relationship with their parents, and that has felt like a liberation. That's felt like a freedom for them.
Yes. I mean, I still see it as deeply sad, because you would hope that you could maintain a relationship, but in some places the parents are just not safe people to be in a relationship with any longer. There's a wonderful book called can't think who it's by, Mothers Who Cannot Love, and it's very
stark.
It is, and it's a stark book to recommend people read, because it is, people go, oh gosh, I could only read a chapter because it's so what happened to me. But it's very practical, because she goes through these different sorts of mothers who can't love, and then, right, what are you going to do about it? And essentially one of the recommendations is that you do break off the relationship completely. And then another one is that she calls it the tea party relationship, where you meet very politely, and you still have a connection, but you're just not going anywhere deep at all.
Not risking anything here.
Not risking anything. And then there's other ways that are kind of deeper, and you might actually be confronting your mother with some of what's gone on and seeing how that goes. But no, it's a really good book. I really recommend that one. On all this.
And it's called Mothers Who Can't Love.
I think so. Mothers Who Cannot Love. Yeah. Okay. So that brings me on to grandparents, actually.
Go ahead, jump all in.
Because there's something interesting going on with grandparents, inevitably, because of the way society has changed, in that so many grandparents are being brought in as carers for their grandchildren, aren't they? Which, that's gone on for eons, but my understanding is it's been more in a context of an extended family where everybody's living fairly near to one another, and it's all kind of quite organic, that it develops. Whereas now there's so much of the daughter has grown up and she's moved over here where she's met her partner, and the grandparents are over here 100 miles away, and how do we manage that? And then meeting the young mothers who are hugely resentful that grandparents are not, I'll come and look after the children every other weekend, because of course the grandparents are like, but I've just retired, I'm living my own life, thank you very much. So that the expectation from one lot that you will protect this relationship with your grandchildren. They will become your priority. That is the thing. And then at the other end, the grandparents going, but hang on, I need to protect myself because I've been living a really busy life for eons, and I now want some space for myself. Thank you very much. And the tension that seems to be causing, which I think is I don't know, who knows, but it feels quite a new thing. I can't remember a feeling around that as a child, that there was this going on, and it comes into.
Is that partly because retirement is people are healthier?
People are healthier,
like, for longer, maybe.
Yes.
So that generation, people are not retiring and
dying
into ill health.
No.
Or dying immediately.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe there's something of that.
There's something.
And like you say, the distance that we have a much more exploded, geographically so.
Yes, and then
exploded society.
Going economic, the costs of childcare. Because women going back into work and having to juggle all that, and obviously thinking, well, surely grandparents could help with this, and some grandparents being absolutely, that's just what I want to do, and others like, no, I don't want to do
and
more.
And there's a halfway house as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. There's friends of mine who are absolutely the grandparent in this situation, who are saying, and relatives, my sister-in-law has kind of just gone through this, that they're in the situation where they want absolutely to be a part of their grandchild's life.
Yes.
But what they can't do is commit to every Thursday between 9 and 4.
Yes.
Because then the nursery or childcare place that the parents, the mother and father, potentially, oh gosh, why am I even being heteronormative there? That the two parents would want to put their child into, that childcare place is demanding. Well, you either pay for 5 days a week or you pay for 3 days a week, and that's what you get for the year or the 5 years or however long you booked it for. And so then the grandparents having to commit, like sometimes before the baby's even born, they're having to commit to donating an entire every Thursday for the next 3 years until the child's in school. And then what happens if there's a second child? Do I then have to do it? And so I could end up dedicating my Thursdays for the next 6 years to one or two children that Thursday every week stops me going on holidays. It's a very real.
Yes. And they were thinking, well, when I'm retired, I'll have all this flexibility. I can go on a holiday, and not have those high costs and all of that. As you go, that's so difficult because you, of course, you want to protect the relationship with your children and your grandchildren, but also, of course, you want to look after yourself in your declining years, before it's too late. Yes.
And that's another thing, isn't it? Is that social mobility, the idea that people do have the capacity now to go on holidays more, and that sort of maybe more financial disposable income at an older age maybe is different as well. Yeah. Oh, gosh, what do we know about? I don't know. Maybe you do know about all these factors, but I don't have many people of that generation in my counselling room. I certainly just basing this on anecdotal evidence of people that I encounter in my personal life.
Yes. No, I have one or two. In that generation. But I mean, I suppose that also touching on older people. We haven't mentioned the fact that any relationship is at the mercy of death, isn't it? No. And when somebody loses somebody suddenly, what that does to them in terms of attachment, because there's actually a brilliant article in this month's Therapy Today about somebody who lost her husband very suddenly, and she thought she was like okay with death. She'd lost her parents, she'd lost somebody else she was very close to, and then her husband suddenly dying, and realize, and then what that does to your attachment system, if you like, because it's just gone. It's just been ripped out of you, and you're left trying to pick up the pieces. And there was a lovely quote, I've got it here, hang on a minute, I brought it up with me. Yes, it says, Alan Shaw, who writes in Affect Regulation and the Repair of the Self, writes that it is the secure and safe attachment that is our protection against pathology. So, and that's so right, isn't it? That we are having a secure attachment is so beneficial to our mental health, to our physical health.
Mm-hmm.
And then the absolute agony of the rupture, I mean, it's just ripped out of you when suddenly somebody who you have that attachment with just dies. But I suppose that's something that it's always in my mind, and maybe because my parents died young, that this relationship is that you have with whoever your main attachment person is. It's not a very good phrase, but anyway, it's actually so precious. It's so precious. So keeping in mind the work of protecting it whilst protecting yourself is so important, because you could lose it at any moment.
You're talking again about not fighting what is.
Yeah.
So if the tragedy of losing somebody who is your main attachment focus, losing that person prematurely, that the pain of that is huge. If we then add on top of that, this shouldn't happen.
Yes.
Children should outlive their parents, or we should have lived to old age. We should have had a nice retirement. If you're adding that extra element, then you are adding a whole other layer of suffering on top, because you're then thinking, why me? Why has this happened to me? On top of it just being the most enormous tragedy that, like you say, you're trying to pick up the pieces of.
Yeah. So, is that a good place to stop? Because it's nearly 11 o'clock.
I think it is.
On that
we've talked for 53 minutes. Lovely. So we'll leave you with the thought of impending death, tragedy, the way that will rip you apart.
Yes, but making the most of the present moment with your lovely person.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like that, Meg. I like that. Let's stay with that, because that's presence, isn't it? That's now. I like that. Yeah. Don't take anything for granted.
No, absolutely.
Because the universe could whip it away at any point.
Yeah.
Meg, just before we do go, tell everybody where they can find you if people, where you're working from, because I remember all of this, but our listeners will need to.
So I mostly work face to face in Warwick. I do a bit of work on Zoom, and you can find me on my website www.megharper.co.uk. So that's it.
Thanks very much. And you do couples as well as...
I do couples, and I really like creative work as well as I'm sort of trying to be more confident about doing more creative work, because I am trained and qualified in it. I just, I'm a bit of a wimp. So, but if anybody wants to...
So if somebody brought that...
Yeah, they said, I really want to do some creative work, I'd be really pleased to meet them. That'd be great. Okay. All right. So,
thanks ever so much, Meg.
It's been lovely. Thank you.
It was really, really lovely conversation. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for being with us this episode. The B-side, which takes one aspect of this episode and digs a little deeper into how that might be explored in the therapy room, will drop very soon. In the meantime, if you'd like to have more of our conversations and metaphorical excavations, it would be grand for you and grand for us if you would subscribe to the podcast or share a favourite episode with a friend.